The vibrating floor of the high consistory was humming at precisely 42 hertz. I knew this because the neural shunt behind my left ear was screaming in agony, translating the architecture's ancient song into a migraine that felt like a miniature supernova was trying to birth itself inside my skull. On Ethelgard, everything sang. The walls sang, the floors sang, and apparently the 12-foot-tall, blue-skinned judges staring down at me sang a chorus of, "You are absolutely screwed." Silence, human. The arch-prelate Malachor didn't actually speak the words. Instead, he projected a sub-bass frequency through the air that my translator turned into a voice colder than a liquid nitrogen bath. You stand accused of harmonic desecration. You have gazed upon the High Cantor in her unveiled resonance. "Look, arch-high vibe, man," I said, wincing as my own voice sounded like a bag of gravel in a blender compared to their melodic tones. "I was just looking for the Wi-Fi. Or, the seismic regulator I was supposed to fix. Your palace has terrible signage. One minute I'm following a gold leaf corridor, the next I'm in a steam-filled grotto seeing things that are definitely not on the tourist brochure." To my left, High Cantor Valina stood as rigid as a crystalline spire. She was wrapped in translucent silks now, but the image of her in the ether bath, skin shimmering with bioluminescent patterns, her mind literally plugged into the planet's ley lines, was burned into my retinas. She looked like a goddess made of sapphire and starlight, and she looked like she wanted to atomize me with a thought. Her violet eyes narrowed. "The breach is absolute," she projected, the frequency so sharp it made my teeth ache. The ritual was halfway through the soul sync. By witnessing the unveiled, this creature has tethered his discordant frequency to mine. He is noise in my symphony. Noise? I scoffed, trying to ignore the two guards who looked like they were carved from obsidian and muscle. "I'll have you know my mother called me highly textured. Besides, it was an accident. I'm a relic architect, not a voyeur." Arch-prelate Malachor leaned forward, his ceremonial robes clicking like 1,000 wind chimes. "The ancient laws of the silencing are clear, Jaxen Vane. For the crime of harmonic desecration, the penalty is the shattering. Your consciousness will be vibrationally dismantled until you are nothing but silent dust." I felt the blood drain from my face. Okay, so shattering sounds bad. Like end of the franchise bad. Is there a plan B? Maybe a very sternly worded letter of apology? Vailina stepped forward, her movement a fluid melody. "There is the binding," she said, her voice dropping to a frequency that felt oddly like a physical caress against my mind. "A neural shotgun wedding, as your people might crudely describe it. Our frequencies are already entangled. To kill him now would cause a resonance cascade that might destabilize my own cortex." Malachor's eyes flashed with something that wasn't quite holiness. Ambition, maybe, or greed. To bind a High Cantor to a short-circuiting human? It is an insult to the pulse. "Wait, back up," I interjected, waving my hands. "Binding? As in permanent? Like, until death do us part, but with more brain-melting telepathy?" The High Cantor turned to me. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of aristocratic frost. "You will face the trials of the three echoes, Jaxen Vane. If you survive, we are bound. If you fail, the shattering will be a mercy compared to the feedback." "Great," I muttered, leaning back against the cold, humming wall. "I came here for a paycheck and a tan, and I'm leaving with a blue wife and a death wish. Just another Tuesday in the void." 20 minutes later, I was being shoved into a holding cell that looked more like a jewelry box for giants. The walls were translucent quartz, pulsing with a rhythmic, deep blue light. I sat on the floor, my head in my hands, trying to breathe through the tinnitus. "Jax, you still in one piece? Or did they turn you into a tuning fork?" I looked up. Dr. Kayla Thorne was standing outside the energy barrier, her face pale. She was the only person from the Earth Alliance who hadn't run for the shuttle the moment the guards drew their sonic lances. "Hey, Kay," I sighed. "Good news, I'm not getting executed. Bad news, I'm getting married. Also, the bride wants to kill me, and the father-in-law is a literal skyscraper." Kayla tapped her datapad nervously. "Jax, I've been reading their archives. The binding isn't just a ceremony. It's a total synaptic overwrite. They're going to link your nervous system to hers. If she sneezes, your brain feels a hurricane. If you think a dirty thought, she'll know it before you do. I'm an open book, Kay. Mostly a picture book with some coffee stains. This isn't a joke, she whispered, leaning closer to the shimmering field. The Ethelgard power core is failing. The pulse is dying. Malachor isn't doing this for tradition. He thinks your broken brain, the way you process sound through your glitches, might be a bridge to the old machines. You're not a groom, Jax. You're a patch cord. I looked at my shaking hands. My whole life, the ringing in my ears had been a curse, a defect that kept me from the high-flying engineering jobs. And now, on a planet made of music, my defect was the only thing that made me valuable. So I'm a sacrificial lamb in fancy armor, I said, a bitter edge creeping into my voice. Typical. Well, if they want a symphony, they're going to have to deal with some heavy metal. Preparation for an Athelian wedding doesn't involve picking out flower arrangements or arguing over the guest list. It involves being scrubbed by exfoliating biogels that feel like they're trying to peel off your very soul and then being fitted with resonance plate, armor that is literally grown from the wearer's biosignature. The attendants were silent, their movements synchronized to a rhythmic humming that seemed to vibrate from the floor. They stripped me of my Alliance uniform, my only connection to a world where Hertz was just a unit of measurement and not a way of life, and replaced it with a sleek, iridescent suit that clung to my skin like a second layer of muscle. Easy with the goods, fellas, I grumbled as one of the attendants pressed a crystalline sensor against my spine. It felt like a cold needle made of pure light. I've got a very sensitive ego and an even more sensitive nervous system. The attendant didn't blink. Dignity is a low-frequency emotion, he projected into my mind. You must prepare for the echo of truth. The doors slid open and Vilena entered. She was no longer in her silks. She wore a matching set of resonance plate, colored the deep, haunting purple of a bruise. She looked less like a bride and more like a general preparing for a siege. She dismissed the attendants with a sharp harmonic pulse. We were alone in the room, the only sound the distant, dying throb of the planet's heart. You look stunning, I said, trying to find some semblance of my usual snark. In a, I'm about to be your downfall kind of way. Vilena walked toward me, her footsteps silent. She stopped inches away, her height making me feel even smaller than usual. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above the neural shunt behind my ear. Your shunt is primitive, she said. It filters the world into thin, flat lines. You do not hear Ethelgard. You hear its ghost. The ghost is already giving me a migraine, Your Highness. I don't need the full surround sound experience. She leaned in closer, and for a second I smelled something like ozone and crushed lilies. Why did you not run? When you saw me in the grotto, you had 30 seconds before the security pylon triggered. You could have retreated into the shadows. I hesitated. The snarky answer was, I was frozen in shock because you're a 10. But the truth felt heavier. I heard a sound, I admitted, my voice dropping, behind the water. It wasn't the ceremony. It was a crack, a discord. It sounded like someone was screaming under a mile of ice. I forgot where I was because I was trying to figure out how to fix it. Valena's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock crossing her face. You heard the fracture? Is that what you call it? It's out of tune, about 3 semitones flat. It's annoying as hell. She pulled back, her breath hitching. No one, not even the archprelate, can hear the fracture without being plugged into the high console. Our people have become deaf to the planet's pain. We only hear the tradition we've been taught to hear. Maybe being broken has its perks, I muttered, rubbing my temple. She looked at me then, not as a trespasser or a political tool, but as a person. For the first time, I felt a threat of something through the air, a resonance of fear. She was terrified. The core is dying, Jaxen Vane, she projected, the frequency trembling. My father and Malachor believe the binding will allow us to use your unique neural pathways to bypass the corruption in the interface. They think you are the key to the lock. And what do you think? I think they are sending a man who cannot swim into the center of an ocean, she said quietly. The trial of truth begins in 1 hour. If you lie, even to yourself, the bioenergy will fry your synapses. Good to know. I'll keep the self-delusion to a minimum. She turned to leave but stopped at the door. Malachor is not your friend, Jackson. He is not mine either. He wants the pulse, and he doesn't care if the bridge he builds with our bodies burns to ashes once he's crossed it. Then why do it? Why not just bug out? I've got a ship. It's not much, but it's fast. Because I love my world more than I fear my death, she said, her voice regaining its icy strength. Do you love anything that much, human? I looked at the quartz walls, at the shimmering armor on my chest, and thought of my cluttered apartment on Earth, the half-finished projects, the feeling of never quite fitting in. I'm working on it, I said. As she disappeared into the corridor, I felt a strange vibration in my chest. It wasn't the planet, it was my own heart, thudding in a rhythm that suddenly felt very, very lonely. The trial of truth was held in the Hall of Infinite Echoes. It was a massive inverted pyramid of mirrors, each one vibrating at a different pitch. In the center sat a pool of liquid mercury that didn't reflect light, it reflected intent. Malachor stood at the apex. Drink, Jaxen Vane. Let the silver tell the tale. I stepped toward the pool. Kalith was in the shadows, her eyes wide with terror. I took the ceremonial bowl, the liquid heavy and cold. Bottoms up, I whispered. The moment the liquid hit my tongue, the world exploded into sound. Every lie I'd ever told myself, that I was fine being alone, that my work didn't matter, that I wasn't afraid, echoed back at me like a physical blow. The mirrors began to scream. Why are you here? Malachor's voice boomed, amplified by 1,000 reflections. To fix the regulators, I yelled, my knees buckling. Lie, the mirrors shrieked. To get paid. Partial truth. I gasped for air, the silver in my veins turning into needles of ice. I looked at Vailina, who was watching me with an intensity that felt like a spotlight. I'm here because I have nowhere else to go. I screamed, the honesty tearing out of my throat. I'm here because I'm a failure on my own world, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I could be useful here. The screaming stopped. The mirrors settled into a low, appreciative hum. Malachor's face darkened. Do you intend to harm the High Cantor? No, I panted, sweat dripping from my chin. I want to save her, even if she thinks I'm just noise. The pool turned a brilliant, calm blue. The first echo is satisfied, Malachor said, his voice dripping with disappointment. Prepare for the trial of strength. The arch-curator Malachor's champion awaits. As I was led away, I caught a glimpse of Vailina. She wasn't looking at the judges. She was looking at me, and for the first time her frequency was in perfect, haunting harmony with mine. I had survived the truth. Now I just had to survive a fight with a blue giant who had been trained since birth to turn people into dust. Hey, Kay, I called out as I passed my friend. If I die, tell my mom I finally found someone who really gets into my head. Shut up, Jax, she sobbed, half laughing. Just don't die. I'll try, I said, feeling the weight of the armor settle on my shoulders. But no promises. This wedding is already killing me. The arena of shrieking glass was not, as the name might suggest, a pleasant place for a person with a permanent ringing in his ears. It was a bowl of jagged obsidian and vibrating quartz, designed to amplify every sound into a weapon. The air itself felt thick, shimmering with micro-vibrations that made my skin itch. I stood at the center, feeling like a very small, very fragile bug under a very large magnifying glass. My iridescent resonance armor was humming, trying to sync with a floor that was currently hitting a frequency that made my molars feel loose. Across the expanse, my opponent waited. His name was Commander Valerius, but the local street slang had dubbed him the Iron Cantor. He was a mountain of a man, even by Athelian standards, standing nearly 8 feet tall with skin the color of a stormy sea. His armor was thick, matte black, and looked like it had been forged in the heart of a dying star. He didn't carry a blade or a blaster. He carried a tuning fork. It was a 2-pronged staff made of pure white crystal, nearly 3 meters long. Every time he tapped it against the ground, a shock wave of sound rippled through the air, hitting me in the chest like a physical punch. Listen well, human, Valerius projected, his voice a gravelly baritone that bypassed my ears and went straight for my cerebellum. Strength is not found in the muscle of the arm, but in the purity of the resonance. You are a cacophony. I am the silence that follows the strike. I adjusted my grip on my own weapon. I hadn't gone for the ceremonial staves or the fancy sonic rapiers. I had requested a customized industrial resonance wrench, basically a heavy metal pipe with a variable frequency emitter at the tip. It looked like a piece of junk compared to his ivory staff, but it felt right in my hand. It was an engineer's tool. It was meant for fixing things, not breaking them, but I figured the universe wouldn't mind a little role reversal for the afternoon. "You talk a lot for a guy who calls himself Silence," I shouted back, my voice echoing off the glass walls. And for the record, I prefer the term rhythmically challenged. It's more inclusive. I could see High Cantor in the royal box. She looked pale, her hands gripping the crystalline railing so hard I thought it might shatter. Beside her, Archprelate Malachor looked bored, as if he were simply waiting for the janitorial staff to come and sweep up my remains. The official at the center of the arena, an elderly priest with ears so large they looked like satellite dishes, raised a silver rod. The trial of strength commences at the stroke of the midday chime. Victory by submission, incapacitation, or the absolute silencing. I didn't like the sound of that last one. A giant crystal bell at the top of the arena struck once. The sound was so loud it felt like it had been fired out of a cannon. Before the echo could even fade, Valerius moved. For a man of his size, he was terrifyingly fast. He didn't run. He glided, his feet barely touching the glass. He swung his tuning fork in a wide arc, and a crescent wave of compressed air slammed into me. I barely managed to roll out of the way, the glass floor scraping against my armor. Where I had been standing a split second before, the obsidian cracked under the pressure of the sound wave. "Okay, so we're playing for keeps," I muttered, scrambling to my feet. "Copy that." Valerius didn't give me time to breathe. He tapped his staff against the floor, hitting a frequency of approximately 60 hertz. My armor began to vibrate in sympathy, the internal dampeners screaming as they tried to compensate. It felt like my ribs were being turned into a xylophone. I could feel my vision blurring as my brain rattled inside my skull. "Focus, Jax," I told myself, clutching the wrench. "Don't listen to the noise. Listen to the flaw." That was the thing about my tinnitus. It wasn't just a ringing, it was a constant, shifting pitch that reacted to the environment. Back on Earth, it was a nuisance. Here it was a sensor suite. I could hear the tiny, high-pitched whistle of a hairline fracture in the obsidian floor 10 meters away. I could hear the way the air thinned out around Valerius's staff right before he struck. He lunged again, a direct thrust intended to pin me against the wall. I didn't parry. I couldn't. His strength would have snapped my arms like dry twigs. Instead, I jammed my wrench into the floor and dialed the emitter to 99 hertz. The floor didn't just vibrate, it shrieked. A pillar of standing waves erupted between us, refracting Valerius's sonic thrust and sending it spiraling into the ceiling. The impact was so great it knocked both of us backward. Valerius recovered first, his expression shifting from calm arrogance to something resembling genuine annoyance. "A lucky strike, human, but you cannot hide behind your toys forever." He raised his staff high, and the prongs began to glow with a fierce white light. The air began to hum with a low, bone-deep thrum that I recognized instantly. It was the resonance frequency of Athelian bone. If he hit that note, my skeleton would literally vibrate itself into splinters. "Oh, that's just cheating," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked up at Vilena. For a heartbeat, our eyes locked. Through the faint, lingering bond of the truth ritual, I felt a surge of information. It wasn't a thought exactly. It was a memory. A memory of her teaching a group of young acolytes about the void note, the frequency that cancels out all others. The Iron Cantor swung his staff down, and the world went white with sound. The vibration hit me like a tidal wave, a wall of pure energy designed to end my existence. I didn't fight it. I didn't try to block it. I closed my eyes and leaned into the ringing in my own head. I searched for that one sharp, annoying whistle that had plagued me since I was 12 years old. I found it, tuned my wrench to match it perfectly, and slammed the tool against the floor. The result was a sound that shouldn't have existed. It wasn't a noise. It was a hole in the world. The two frequencies slammed into each other and simply vanished. The void note. The shock of the sudden, absolute silence was more painful than the noise had been. Valerius gasped, his ivory staff cracking down the middle as the feedback traveled up the prongs and into his arms. He stumbled, the matte black armor on his chest splitting open like a ripe fruit. I didn't wait. I charged forward, using the last of my momentum to swing the heavy metal wrench. I didn't hit him in the head or the chest. I hit the center of his staff. The white crystal shattered into 10,000 pieces, each one singing a tiny mournful note as it hit the glass. Valerius fell to his knees, his hands trembling. He looked up at me, his stormy skin pale with shock. The silence remained for several seconds, heavy and suffocating. Then the crowd began to murmur, a low buzzing sound that grew into a roar. "The human has disarmed the Iron Cantor," the official announced, his voice sounding thin and shaky in the aftermath of the void note. "By the laws of the arena, the trial of strength is concluded. Jaxen Vane stands victorious." I stood there, gasping for air, my hands shaking so hard I had to drop the wrench. My ears were ringing louder than ever, a triumphant, agonizing chorus. I looked up at the royal box. Malachor was already gone, his seat empty. Valina was standing, her face a mask of shock, but her eyes were bright with something that looked suspiciously like hope. "You okay, Jax?" I turned to see Kalith running toward me, dodging the guards. She grabbed my arm, checking my vitals with her scanner. "Your blood pressure is through the roof, and your neural readings are a mess. But you're alive. How the hell did you do that?" "I just found the right note," I croaked, leaning on her for support. "Turns out being a glitch in the system has its advantages." "They're not going to let this go," she whispered, her voice urgent. "Malachor looks like he wants to personally dismantle you. The next trial is compatibility, Jax. That's the big one. That's where the brain melting happens." "One thing at a time, Kay," I said, looking at the broken shards of the ivory staff. "Right now I just want a glass of water and a room that doesn't hum." But even as I spoke, I could feel the planet beneath my feet. It was still screaming, that low subdermal cry of the fracture. Winning a fight in a glass bowl was one thing. Fixing a dying world while married to its princess was another thing entirely. "Come on," I said, straightening my back as best I could. "Let's go see the bride. I have a feeling the honeymoon is going to be a real blast." As we walked out of the arena, I felt a strange sensation in the back of my mind. It was Valina. She was projecting again, but it wasn't a command or a threat. It was a single, clear frequency that felt like a question. I didn't have the words to answer, so I just hummed that annoying little tune in my head, the one that never went away. I think she heard me. The palace of the Core dynasty was even more impressive when you were being escorted through it as a hero instead of a prisoner. The walls were made of a translucent, honey-colored crystal that pulsed with a warm light, and the air smelled like ozone and ancient parchment. But beneath the beauty, the rot was more apparent. I could see the dim patches in the walls where the bioluminescence was flickering out, and the humming of the building felt strained, like an engine running on its last liter of fuel. I was sitting in a recovery room that was basically a giant hollowed-out geode. Kalith was still hovering over me, poking at my ears with a medical wand. "Stop it, Kay," I complained, batting her hand away. "I've had enough things vibrating near my head for one day. My ears are fine, or as fine as they ever are." "You took a direct hit from a high-frequency sonic wave, Jax," she snapped. "If your resonance armor hadn't been custom-tuned to your specific neural patterns, you'd be a pile of jelly right now. You're lucky you're just a little bit more deaf than usual." "I prefer the term selectively hearing," I said, trying to sit up. "Where is she? My better half? The one who's supposed to be sharing my brain space?" "The High Cantor is preparing for the final trial," a voice said from the doorway. I looked up to see an Athelian female I hadn't met before. She was older, with deep lines etched into her blue skin and eyes that looked like they had seen the birth and death of several suns. She was dressed in simple gray robes that didn't hum. "I am Elder Syra," she said, bowing slightly. "I am the keeper of the root. The High Cantor has requested your presence, not in the ceremonial chambers, but at the fracture itself." Kalith froze. "The fracture? That's restricted, even for Earth Alliance advisors." "The rules are shifting, Dr. Thorne," Syra replied. "The planet is not waiting for our permission to die. Follow me." We were led deep into the bowels of the palace, past the grand halls and the sparkling grottos, down into the dark, damp foundations where the crystal turned from translucent to a murky, bruised purple. We boarded a grav lift that descended for what felt like several kilometers. As we went deeper, the silence became oppressive. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of a void. "This is the root chamber," Sierra whispered as the lift doors slid open. The room was vast, a cathedral of raw, unpolished crystal. In the center was a massive, pulsing structure that looked like a cross between a tree root and a fiber optic cable. It was 300 meters tall, its branches disappearing into the ceiling, its base submerged in a pool of glowing blue fluid. This was the biocomputer, the heart of Ethelgard, and it was dying. I could see the black veins of the fracture creeping up the main trunk like a digital virus. Where the black met the blue, the crystal was cracking, shedding flakes of dead matter that hissed as they hit the fluid. Vailina was standing at the edge of the pool. She looked small against the backdrop of the failing god. She had stripped off her combat armor and was back in her simple white silks. When she turned to look at us, her face was wet with tears. "You see it now, Jaxen Vane," she said, her voice a fragile melody. "This is the perfect world you were sent to protect." I walked to the edge of the pool, the ringing in my ears reaching a fever pitch. Up close, the sound of the fracture was agonizing. It wasn't a noise. It was a sob. "It's a resonance feedback loop," I said, my engineer brain taking over. "The core is trying to output power, but the conduits are blocked by the corruption. The energy has nowhere to go, so it reflects back into the source. It's literally shaking itself to pieces. Our scientists say it is a natural depletion," Syra said, her voice heavy with grief, "that the planet has simply reached the end of its life." "Nonsense," I snapped, kneeling to look at the black veins. "Planets don't just deplete like a battery. This is an external interference. This is a hack." Vailina stepped closer to me. "A hack? You mean someone is doing this?" "Look at the pattern," I said, pointing to the way the black veins twisted. "That's not random growth. That's a geometric sequence. It's a dampening field designed to suppress the core's frequency until it flatlines. Someone is killing your world on purpose." A heavy silence followed my words. I could feel the weight of their gaze on me. The high-born princess and the ancient elder, looking at a broken human for an answer they couldn't find in 10,000 years of tradition. "Malachor," Vailina whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "He doesn't want to fix the core. He wants to replace it. He's been building a synthetic resonator in the southern hemisphere. He says it's a backup, but if the core dies, he becomes the only source of power on Ethelgard. He becomes a god." "And the binding?" I asked. "Where do I fit in?" Vailina looked at the ground. "The final trial, the compatibility, requires us to enter the interface together. He thinks that your neural tinnitus, the way your brain constantly searches for frequencies, will act as a lightning rod. He wants to use you to draw the corruption out of the core and into yourself." "To clear the pipes," I said, a cold dread settling in my stomach. "And let me guess, my brain doesn't survive the process." "No," she said softly. "It would be the absolute silencing." "Well, that's a real buzzkill," I muttered, looking back at the dying tree. "For the love of Einstein, Malachor really is a piece of work. We cannot let him do this," Vailina said, her voice gaining a new sharp edge. "But if we do not enter the trial, he will simply have you executed and find another way. The planet only has days left, perhaps hours." I stood up, dusting off my hands. "Okay, so we have a plan. We go through with the trial. We enter the interface. But instead of being his lightning rod, we're going to be his antivirus." "Jax, that's suicide," Kayla said, grabbing my arm. "You don't even know how to navigate an Athelian interface. You'll get lost in the subroutines before you even reach the fracture." "I won't be alone," I said, looking at Vailina. "That's the whole point of the binding, right? 2 souls, 1 brain. She knows the map, I know the tools. Together, we're a 2-man repair crew." Vailina stepped forward, her violet eyes searching mine. "You would risk this? For a world that is not yours? For a woman you only met because of a bureaucratic error?" I shrugged, trying to look cooler than I felt. "Look, back home, I'm just a guy who fixes broken radios and complains about the noise. Here, I'm apparently a legendary hero with a blue princess wife. I've always liked an upgrade. Besides, I hate to see a good machine go to waste." The truth was, it wasn't just about the machine. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a mistake. The very thing that had made me an outcast on Earth, the constant, unyielding noise in my head, was the only thing that could save this world. My flaw was my function. The binding is more than just a repair mission, Jaxen, Vailina said, her voice dropping to a frequency that only I could hear. It is an intimacy that your kind has never known. Every memory, every dream, every shame. You will see it all, and I will see yours. I've got nothing to hide, I said, though my heart was pounding. A few bad breakups, a weird obsession with antique synthesizers, and that one time I tried to fix a fusion reactor with a piece of chewing gum. It's all there. Vailina reached out and took my hand. Her skin was cool, but her touch felt like an electric current. Through our growing bond, I felt her gratitude, her fear, and a strange, flickering spark of something that felt remarkably like affection. Then we shall be the discord that breaks the silence, she said. Elder Syra watched us, a small, knowing smile on her face. The convergence of the broken pieces. It is a song we have not sung in a very long time. Go. Prepare. The final trial begins at dawn. As we left the root chamber, the atmosphere in the palace had shifted. The guards seemed more tense, the air humming with a nervous energy. We were no longer just participants in a ritual. We were the center of a storm. Back in my room, I tried to get some sleep, but the ringing was too loud. It felt like the planet was calling to me, a low, rhythmic thumping that matched the beat of my own heart. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the iridescent armor on the stand. I thought about the perfect Athelian society, the music, the grace, the ancient laws. And I thought about Vailina, who was supposed to be the pinnacle of it all, but who felt just as lost and broken as I did. Hey, Jax. Calith was leaning against the doorframe, looking tired. I've been running the numbers on the resonance feedback. If this works, you're going to be a hero, but if it doesn't, the discharge will be enough to level the palace. No pressure then, I said, giving her a weak grin. I'm serious, Jax. This isn't a movie. There's no reset button. Are you sure you can trust her? She's been raised to believe we're inferior. What if she lets you take the hit to save herself? She won't, I said, the certainty of the statement surprising even me. I've been in her head, Kay, or at least on the front porch. She's not like Malachor. She's scared and she's lonely and she's looking for a way out of the silence just like I am. Calith sighed. You always were a sucker for a project. Just don't forget to come back. I don't want to have to explain to your mom how you got fused into a giant crystal tree. I'll do my best, I said. The night passed in a blur of half dreams and humming shadows. When the dawn light, a pale, ethereal purple, began to filter through the geode walls, I stood up and began to dress. My movements were slow, deliberate. I felt like a man walking toward his own execution, but for the first time in my life, I knew exactly why I was taking the steps. The final trial was held in the sanctum of the pulse, the highest point of the palace. It was a circular room with a ceiling that opened to the stars, the air thin and cold. In the center was the high console, a complex web of glowing filaments that connected directly to the root chamber far below. Archprelate Malachor was waiting, surrounded by a dozen high priests. His expression was a mask of cold anticipation. Vailina was already at the console, her silken robes fluttering in the wind. The compatibility commences, Malachor announced, his voice a sharp, cutting frequency. Step forward, Jaxen Vane. Enter the union. I walked toward the console, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. Vailina reached out her hand and I took it. Ready to break some rules? I whispered. Her violet eyes flashed with a sudden, fierce light. Ready. We placed our free hands on the glowing filaments. The world didn't just fade, it vanished. There was no floor, no ceiling, no Malachor. There was only a vast, infinite ocean of sound, a billion frequencies clashing and merging in a dizzying kaleidoscope of sensory input. Jaxen. It wasn't a voice, it was a presence. Vailina. She was a brilliant, shimmering melody in the darkness, a golden thread that I grabbed onto with everything I had. I'm here, I projected back, the thought feeling like a solid object. Show me the way. Together we dived into the data stream, racing toward the dark, jagged shadow of the fracture. The noise was deafening, a roar of corruption that tried to tear us apart. I could feel my own mind fraying, the tinnitus in my head turning into a physical weight that threatened to crush my consciousness. "Stay with me," Valina urged, her melody wrapping around me like armor. We reached the center of the corruption, the place where the dampening field was rooted. It looked like a knot of black thorns, pulsing with a sick rhythmic throb. There it is, I thought, my engineer instincts kicking in. That's the source. We need to overload it. We need to hit it with everything we've got. But the discharge, she warned, it will pass through you first. I can take it, I lied. My brain is already short-circuited. Just sync with me. On the count of 3. 1. The ocean of sound roared, trying to drown us. 2. Valina's presence grew brighter, warmer, her essence merging with mine until I couldn't tell where I ended and she began. 3. We struck. The explosion wasn't made of fire or light. It was made of pure, unadulterated sound. A wave of harmony so powerful it shattered the black thorns, turning them into harmless echoes. The discharge hit me like a bolt of lightning, a billion volts of raw data screaming through my neural pathways. I felt my heart stop. I felt my lungs freeze. I felt the absolute silencing closing in around me, a cold, dark void that promised an end to the noise. But then, through the darkness, I felt a hand, a cool, firm grip that wouldn't let go. "Not yet, human," Valina's voice echoed in the void. "The song is not over." And then the world came rushing back. I was on the floor of the sanctum, gasping for air, my chest heaving. The sky was no longer pale purple. It was a brilliant, vibrant gold. The humming of the palace had changed. It was no longer a groan of pain. It was a deep, resonant thrum of health. The pulse was restored. I looked up to see Valina kneeling beside me, her face pale but her eyes shining. Behind her, Malachor was staring at the high console in horror. The synthetic resonator he had built was shattered, its frequency overridden by the restored core. You survived," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "The discharge should have destroyed you." I sat up, wiping blood from my nose. My ears were still ringing, but it was different now. The ringing wasn't a curse anymore. It was a part of the planet's new song. "Sorry to disappoint you, prelate," I croaked, leaning on Valina for support. "But it turns out I'm a lot harder to silence than you thought." The high priests were already bowing, their loyalties shifting as quickly as the frequencies of the room. The miracle of the restored pulse was undeniable. "The union is consecrated," the elder priest announced, his voice echoing through the sanctum. "The High Cantor and the human are bound. The era of the convergence has begun." I looked at Valina. She was smiling, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Well, wife," I said, my voice shaky but certain. "I guess that means we're stuck with each other." She took my hand, her grip firm and warm. "I think I can learn to live with the noise." But as we stood together, looking out over the glowing city of Ethelgard, I knew the battle wasn't over. Malachor was still there, and the differences between our worlds wouldn't vanish overnight. But for the first time in my life, the ringing in my ears didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like a promise. We were the broken pieces, and together we were the only ones who could hear the truth. "Come on," I said, pulling her toward the door. "We've got a world to fix." And I'm pretty sure I heard a rattle in the grav lift on the way up. Valina laughed, a sound more beautiful than any symphony. "Lead the way, engineer." As we walked out into the gold-lit morning, I realized that I hadn't just survived a wedding. I had found a home. And for a guy who had spent his whole life trying to find the right frequency, that was the greatest resonance of all. The Palace of Echoes was currently vibrating at a frequency I could only describe as high in anxiety. I had been married or synaptically shackled, depending on who you asked, for exactly 48 hours, and I still hadn't figured out where the bathrooms were. What I had figured out was that being the first human to survive the neural binding made me a bigger target than a slow-moving freighter in a pirate-infested nebula. I was standing in front of a mirror that looked like it was carved from a single massive sapphire. I was wearing formal Athelian court attire, which was basically a suit of living crystal that hummed a low, mournful tune every time I breathed. It was tight in the shoulders and itchy in places I didn't want to think about. "You look like you're about to be court-martialed, Jaxen," Caliph said, leaning against the doorway. She was wearing her Earth Alliance dress blues, looking like a beacon of sanity in a world of singing glass. "I feel like I'm being formatted for a drive I didn't sign up for," I muttered, tugging at the crystalline collar. "And this suit is playing a B-flat. I hate B-flat. It makes me feel like I forgot to turn off the oven." "Check your 6, Caliph whispered, her voice dropping. "The brass is starting to arrive. I've heard the Pureblood faction is planning to make a scene tonight. They're calling our little diplomatic union a harmonic corruption." "Let them call it whatever they want," I said, catching my reflection. My neural shunt was glowing a faint, steady purple. The mark of the bond. "I'm the one who saved their tree. You'd think that would buy me some street cred with the Echo Heads." "Street cred doesn't count for much when you're messing with 10,000 years of genetic snobbery," she said, checking her datapad. "Malachor has been busy. He's been spinning the restoration of the pulse as a human-induced mutation. He's telling the Council that the core is no longer pure and that Ethelgard is becoming like Earth." "God forbid," I sighed. "A planet with actual diversity. How terrifying." The doors to my chambers slid open with a melodic trill. Velina walked in, and for a second the ringing in my ears went perfectly silent. It was a side effect of the bond. When we were close, our frequencies canceled out the static. It was the only time I felt truly peaceful. She was wearing a gown of woven light, a masterpiece of bioluminescence that shifted through the colors of the sunset. Her violet eyes were bright, but I could feel the tension behind them. It was like a cold wire vibrating in the back of my mind. "Jaxen," she projected. Her mental voice was clearer now, more intimate. "You are projecting frustrated tech support. Try to project stoic hero." "I don't do stoic well, V," I said aloud. "I'm more of a nervous energy with a side of snark kind of guy. It's part of the charm. Ask anyone." Velina looked at Caliph, a small, weary smile touching her lips. "Your friend is a constant source of discord, Dr. Thorne." "He's a feature, not a bug, Your Highness," Caliph replied with a smirk. Velina walked over to me and adjusted my collar. Her touch sent a ripple of calm through the bond, but I could feel her own exhaustion underneath it. She had spent the last 2 days arguing with the High Council, defending a marriage she hadn't wanted to a man she barely knew. "The gala is a necessity," she told me, her eyes locked on mine. "Malachor is testing us. He wants to see if the bond is stable. If he detects a single moment of dissonance, he will use it to argue that the convergence is a failure. Then we'll give them a symphony," I said, taking her hand. Her skin was cool, but the energy beneath it was a roaring furnace. "Just don't expect me to dance. I have 2 left feet, and I'm pretty sure they're both out of tune." We exited the chambers and made our way toward the grand ballroom. The palace corridors were lined with Athelian nobles, their blue skins shimmering under the restored bioluminescence. They didn't cheer. They just watched us with a cold, analytical curiosity. I felt like a museum exhibit that had suddenly started talking back. "Keep your eyes front," I whispered to Velina. "And if anyone asks, tell them my armor is a limited edition." The ballroom was a massive dome of vibrating quartz. The ceiling opened to the twin moons of Ethelgard. In the center of the room, a fountain of liquid sound erupted, tossing notes into the air that shimmered like diamonds before dissolving. It was beautiful, in a "my senses are being assaulted" kind of way. As we entered, the music shifted. It didn't stop, but the harmony changed, becoming sharper, more aggressive. Archprelate Malachor was standing at the far end of the hall, surrounded by his loyalists. They were all wearing matte white robes, the traditional color of the purists. "Here we go," I muttered. "The welcoming committee." Malachor stepped forward, his robes clicking like dry bones. "Commander Velina, and the architect. It is a rare honor to see a union so visibly active." He looked at our glowing shunts with a mixture of disgust and fascination. "The pulse is strong, Malachor," Velina said, her voice echoing through the hall. "The convergence has done what 10 centuries of isolation could not. Ethelgard is breathing again." "A planet can breathe and still be diseased," Malachor replied, his voice a low-frequency hum that made the liquid sound fountain falter. "Some of us wonder if the price of this breath is our very identity. We are the people of the pure song. We are not meant to be hybridized. Hybridized? I cut in, unable to keep my mouth shut. You make it sound like we're crossbreeding tomatoes. We're talking about survival, pal. Your world was flatlining. I just gave it a jump start. A murmur of disapproval rippled through the purists. Malakor's eyes narrowed. A jump start from a broken battery, human. We have analyzed the new frequencies. They are chaotic. They contain noise. It's called character, I said, stepping forward. I could feel Vileena's warning through the bond, a sharp pull in my gut, but I ignored it. Your pure song was a death march. It was perfect because it was dead. Life is messy. It's loud. It's full of glitches. If you can't handle that, then maybe you're the one who's out of sync. Malakor didn't lose his temper. Instead, he smiled, a thin, predatory stretch of his blue lips. Spoken like a true child of Earth. Tell me, architect, does your character allow you to see the shadows in the harmony? Or is your brain too crowded with static to notice the coming silence? Before I could ask what kind of cryptic threat that was, a high-pitched scream tore through the ballroom. It wasn't a human scream. It was the sound of glass shattering at a molecular level. One of the massive quartz pillars at the edge of the ballroom exploded, sending shards of singing crystal flying into the crowd. Panic erupted instantly. The noble Athelians, usually so composed, scrambled for the exits as the music turned into a cacophony of sirens. "Jaxen!" Valeena shouted, pulling me toward her. Through the bond, I felt a sudden, agonizing spike of pain. It wasn't hers. It was the planet's. Something was hitting the ley lines again, but this wasn't a hack. This was a demolition. "Malakor!" I yelled, looking toward the far end of the hall, but the archprelate was already gone, his white-robed followers vanishing into the chaos like ghosts. "This wasn't a protest," I said, grabbing a shard of crystal and feeling the heat radiating from it. "This was a distraction." "The root chamber," Valeena projected, her panic bleeding into my own mind. "They are attacking the root." We didn't wait for the guards. We ran. We sprinted through the palace, our footsteps echoing like gunshots against the crystal floors. The building was shaking, the melodic hum of the walls replaced by a frantic, jagged vibration that felt like a saw blade against my nerves. "Kay, you there?" I barked into my comlink as we rounded a corner. "Jax, the whole palace is going foobar!" Kalith's voice crackled through the static. "I'm seeing massive energy spikes in the lower sectors." Someone just detonated a series of sonic charges along the secondary conduits. They're trying to isolate the root chamber from the security grid. Malakor's people? Has to be. I've got reports of silencers, extremist purists, moving through the maintenance tunnels. They're armed with military-grade disruptors, Jax. If they hit the core while it's still recalibrating, the feedback won't just kill the planet. It'll turn the palace into a crater. "Get the Earth Alliance team to the shuttles," I ordered, "and see if you can override the elevator locks. We're heading down." "Already on it, but Jax, be careful. The sensors are glitched down there. I can't see what's waiting for you." "Story of my life, Kay. Vane out." We reached the grav lift, but the doors were fused shut. Valeena didn't hesitate. She placed her hands against the crystal and let out a sharp, focused frequency. The doors didn't just slide. They vibrated into dust. We stepped into the shaft. There was no lift. It had been sent plummeting to the bottom. "Hold on," Valeena said, her eyes glowing with a fierce purple light. She grabbed me around the waist and we stepped into the void. We didn't fall. We glided, caught in a controlled resonance field she was generating. It was like being inside a soap bubble made of sound. As we descended into the dark, I could feel the heat rising from below. We reached the bottom and stepped out into a nightmare. The root chamber, once a cathedral of light, was filled with a thick, choking fog of pulverized crystal. The blue fluid in the pool was churning, turning a sickly, bruised gray. Standing around the base of the great tree were 20 figures in matte white armor. They weren't singing. They were silent, their movements mechanical and cold. In the center of them stood Averon, the noble I had beaten in the arena. He was holding a heavy, industrial-grade sonic cannon, aimed directly at the fracture. "Stop!" Valeena's voice boomed, amplified by the chamber's natural acoustics. Averon turned, his face a mask of zealotry. High Cantor, you are too late. The infection must be purged. If Ethelgard cannot be pure, it must be silent. You're going to kill everyone, you idiot, I yelled, stepping forward. The feedback will level the city. Is that your plan? Purity through extinction? Ethelgard will survive in its echoes, Averon said, his voice devoid of emotion. The architect's noise will be erased. The pulse will return to the void, and we will wait for a worthier era. He's brainwashed, I whispered to Valina. I can feel it through the static. His frequency is grounded. He's not even thinking for himself. Malachor is controlling them, she projected. He is using a subsonic command frequency. I can hear it beneath the chaos. Can you jam it? No, my frequency is tied to yours. If I try to broadcast a jammer, the feedback will hit our bond first. It would be like trying to scream while someone is holding your throat. Then we do it the hard way, I said, reaching for the resonance wrench at my belt. I had kept it even for the gala. Best decision of the day. The silencers moved with terrifying coordination. They didn't use blasters. They used sonic lances that fired concentrated bursts of high-frequency vibration. Each hit felt like a sledgehammer to my chest. Valina moved like a whirlwind, her gown of light flaring as she deflected the burst with her own resonance fields. She was a goddess of war, but she was outnumbered and exhausted. I tried to help, but I was just a human with a pipe. I couldn't move as fast as them, and I couldn't see through the fog. Every time I tried to line up a shot with the wrench, a sonic burst would send me sprawling. Jaxen, stay down, Valina cried as a burst caught her in the shoulder, sending her reeling. Through the bond, I felt her pain. It was a cold, sharp spike that almost knocked me unconscious. My neural tinnitus surged, the ringing in my ears becoming a roar that drowned out everything else. Static, noise, discord. Wait. I closed my eyes, letting the roar take over. I stopped trying to see with my eyes. I started listening with my flaw. The fog didn't matter. The chaos didn't matter. Beneath the noise, I could hear them. I could hear the subsonic command frequency hum by Malachor's hidden transmitters. I could hear the way the silencer's armor vibrated as they moved. I could hear the precise moment the air thinned before they fired. It was like a map drawn in sound. V, listen to me, I projected, my mental voice steady for the first time. Don't fight the noise, use it. Sync with my tinnitus. Let me show you where they are. What? Jaxen, that will overwhelm your brain. Just do it! Trust me! I opened the floodgates. I dropped the mental barriers I had built over 20 years to stay sane. I let the full, unadulterated cacophony of my broken brain pour into the bond. It was a torrent of static, a hurricane of screeching frequencies. Valina gasped, her body arching in agony. But then she settled. She found the rhythm within my chaos. She saw what I saw. She didn't need to look. She spun, firing a concentrated pulse of purple energy into the fog. It hit a silencer perfectly in the chest, shattering his armor. She moved again, a blur of motion, her strikes guided by the map of noise I was providing. One by one, the silencers fell. They couldn't hide in the dead zones, because for me, there were no dead zones. There was only the sound. Averon snarled, raising the sonic cannon. Enough! He pulled the trigger. The cannon didn't fire a burst. It fired a sustained beam of pure, destructive frequency. It hit the floor between us, the obsidian turning to liquid under the pressure. The beam was moving toward the root, toward the fracture. No! Valina screamed. She threw herself in front of the beam, her resonance fields flaring to their limit. But the cannon was too powerful. Her fields began to crack, the purple light turning to a dull, flickering gray. Through the bond, I felt her dying. She was pouring everything she had into the shield, but it wasn't enough. The beam was slowly pushing through, the sound of it like 1,000 screaming souls. I stood up, my head feeling like it was about to split in half. My ears were bleeding. My vision was gone. There was only the sound, the noise, my beautiful, broken noise. I walked toward the beam. Jaxen, no! Kayla's voice was a faint whisper in my ear. You can't get that close. Your nervous system will flatline. I didn't listen. I couldn't listen. I was the noise now. I reached Valina and placed my hands on her back. I didn't try to help her shield. I didn't try to push back. Instead, I did the one thing I was an expert at. I became a ground wire. I opened my neural shunt to its absolute maximum capacity. I bypassed every safety filter, every dampener. I turned my own brain into a sinkhole for the energy. The sonic beam hit Valina's shield, but instead of reflecting, the energy flowed through her and into me. It felt like my nerves were being replaced with molten lead. My brain was a feedback loop, the sound amplifying until it was a physical force that lifted me off my feet. Champion, husband, noise. Valina's thoughts were a frantic, loving chorus in my mind. Stop. Jaxen, stop. You are shattering. I'm not shattering, I thought, the words a roar of defiance. I'm retuning. I took all that destructive, pure blood energy, all that hatred and silence, and I ran it through the glitch in my head. I turned the beam into a discord. I turned it into a messy, human, imperfect rhythm. And then I spat it back. I dialed my resonance wrench to the exact inverse frequency of the cannon and slammed it into the floor. The resulting shockwave didn't just stop the beam. It shattered the cannon in Averon's hands. It blew the fog out of the chamber in a single massive gasp of air. It sent the silencers flying like dolls. And then there was silence. Absolute, terrifying silence. I fell to the floor, my hands smoking, my mind a blank, gray void. I couldn't hear the ringing anymore. I couldn't hear the planet. I couldn't even hear my own heart. Is this it? I wondered. The absolute silencing? Then a touch, a hand, cool and firm, pressed against my cheek. A frequency, faint but steady, began to pulse in the darkness. Jaxen, breathe! I opened my eyes. Valina was leaning over me, her gown torn, her skin bruised. But her eyes, her violet eyes were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I tried to speak, but my voice was a rasp. Did we win? We survived, she whispered, her voice a melody that brought the world back into focus. The fracture is stable. Averon is in custody. Malachor. Malachor has fled the palace. I looked around the chamber. The blue pool was clearing, the glow returning to a steady, healthy thrum. The silencers were being led away by royal guards. Kalith was running toward us, her face a mask of relief and anger. You're an idiot, Jaxen Vane, she said, dropping to her knees and scanning me. Your neural pathways are 90% scorched. You have permanent synaptic scarring. You shouldn't be able to walk, let alone talk. I always was. A quick study, I croaked. I looked at my hands, they were trembling. I realized that the ringing was back, but it was quieter now. It was no longer a scream. It was a hum, a background noise that felt right. I had used my flaw to save a world. I had embraced the very thing that made me an outcast, and it had become my greatest strength. But I also knew the cost. I could feel the gaps in my memory, the places where the sonic beam had burned away parts of who I was. I couldn't remember my first car. I couldn't remember the name of my third-grade teacher. I couldn't remember the taste of my favorite coffee. I lost some things, V, I said, looking at Valina. She took my hand, her grip tighter than ever. We will find them again, Jaxen, or we will make new memories to fill the spaces. You are no longer alone in your silence. Through the bond, I felt her love, a deep, resonant harmony that was more powerful than any sonic beam. She saw my scars, my gaps, my noise, and she didn't want to fix them. She wanted to hear them. We have to find Malachor, I said, my voice gaining strength. He won't stop. He'll go to the southern resonator. He'll try to finish what he started. We will find him, Valina promised, standing up and pulling me with her. But first we must inform the people. They must know the truth about the first ones. They must know that we are not meant to be pure. We are meant to be a chorus. As we walked out of the root chamber, I leaned on Valina, and she leaned on me. We were a messy, discordant, imperfect pair. We were a human with a broken brain and an alien princess with a heavy crown. We were exactly what Ethelgard needed. Hey, V, I asked as we reached the grav lift. Yes, husband. When this is over, can we go somewhere quiet, like actual quiet? No singing walls, no humming floors, just A beach? She smiled to sound like a silver bell. I think I would like that very much, Jaxen. But you should know, Ethelian beaches are known for their operatic tides. Of course they are, I sighed. Of course they are. But as the lift carried us back toward the light, I realized I didn't mind. The noise was still there, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting it. I was part of it. And that was the best song I'd ever heard. The medical bay of the Royal Cruiser felt less like a place of healing and more like a high-tech torture chamber designed by someone with an obsession with prisms. I sat on the edge of a levitating diagnostic bed, my head clamped in a series of vibrating magnetic rings that were supposed to be reknitting my scorched synapses. The machine emitted a low, pulsating hum that sat right at the base of my skull, a sound that would have driven most people to distraction, but felt like a warm blanket to me. You're redlining, Jaxen, Calith said, her voice filtered through a thick layer of static that existed only in my own head. She was standing at a console 5 meters away, her brow furrowed as she scanned the data streaming from my neural shunt. Your cortical activity is jumping around like a panicked cat in a room full of rocking chairs. You need to dial it back before you blow a fuse for good. I'm fine, Kay, I said, though my tongue felt like a heavy piece of wet leather. Just a bit of a morning after headache from saving the world. Standard operating procedure. This isn't a hangover, she snapped, walking over to me. She looked tired, her Earth Alliance uniform wrinkled and stained with crystal dust. You took a direct hit from a concentrated sonic demolition beam. You've got synaptic scarring in your frontal lobe and temporal regions. Do you even know what time it is? I hesitated. I looked at the chronometer on the wall, but the symbols were dancing, shifting between Ethelian script and Old Earth numerals. It's 1:30, whatever. Late. Early. Does it really matter? It's 4 a.m, she said quietly. And you've been staring at that wall for 2 hours without blinking. Jax, you're losing pieces of yourself. The data transfer with Vilena during the fight, it didn't just clear the pipes. It rewrote the code. You're becoming a part of the Ethelgard network. I closed my eyes. Behind my eyelids, I didn't see darkness. I saw lines of shimmering blue light, a map of the planet's ley lines that pulsed in time with my own heartbeat. It was beautiful, but it was also terrifying. I could feel the southern hemisphere, a cold, jagged ache in the distance where Malachor was gathering his strength. I know, I whispered, but the noise is quieter now, Kay. For 20 years, I fought the ringing. I tried every pill, every therapy, every experimental patch. I just wanted to be normal. I wanted to be like everyone else. And now the ringing is the only thing that makes sense. Because the ringing isn't an illness anymore, Kayla said, her voice softening. It's an antenna. But you weren't built to be an antenna, Jax. You're a human being. If you keep this up, there won't be enough of Jaxen Vane left to remember why you started this. Before I could respond, the door to the medical bay hissed open. Vilena walked in, her presence immediately dampening the static in my mind. She was dressed in her commander's armor again, the deep purple plates glowing with a renewed vigor. The bond between us had deepened after the battle in the root chamber. I could feel her resolve, her lingering fear for me, and a fierce, protective warmth that made my chest tighten. Jaxen, she projected, you should be resting. The council is in session, and the reports from the south are concerning. I'm a gearhead, V, I said, managing a weak grin as I sat up. We don't rest until the job is done. What's the word on the street? Or the crystal path, whatever you guys call it. She walked over to the bed and placed her hand on my shoulder. Through the contact, I felt a rush of clarity. The diagnostic rings slowed their vibration, mimicking her calm frequency. Malachor has reached the resonator of Valus, she said, the mental image of a massive, black spire rising from the frozen southern wastes appearing in my mind. It is a relic of the first ones, far older than the palace. He is attempting to force a global harmonic shift. He wants to isolate Ethelgard behind a wall of impenetrable sound. If he succeeds, we will be cut off from the galaxy forever. No alliance ships, no trade, no outside interference. And no pulse, I added. He's going to use the resonator to bypass the natural core. He's going to turn the whole planet into a closed-loop system that he controls. Exactly, she replied. The council is divided. Half of them want to wait for diplomacy, believing that Malachor is just posturing. But the other half, the ones who felt the restoration of the pulse, they are ready to fight. Diplomacy with a guy who tried to blow up the planet's heart is like trying to negotiate with a wood chipper, I said, swinging my legs off the bed. Kay, give me the scanner. I need to see the energy signatures of that southern spire. Caleth sighed but handed me the datapad. I've mapped the resonance spikes. It's bad, Jax. He's pulling power directly from the mantle. It's creating a seismic instability that's going to trigger tremors across the southern continent within 12 hours. I looked at the data. The energy curves were jagged, aggressive, and entirely too perfect. It was the pure song, amplified to a lethal degree. Malachor wasn't just building a wall, he was building a weapon of absolute silence. V, we can't wait, I said, standing up. My legs were shaky, but the bond held me steady. If he hits the resonance peak, we won't even be able to get within 10 kilometers of that place. Our armor will vibrate into dust, and our brains will turn into mush. We are preparing the Vanguard, Valina said, her eyes flashing with determination. But my father is hesitant. He still hopes to avoid a civil war. He doesn't understand that the war has already begun. Then we don't ask for permission, I said, grabbing my resonance wrench from the bedside table. We're a rogue element, remember? A harmonic corruption. Let's go put that title to good use. Caleth grabbed my arm. Jax, wait. There's one more thing. I ran a simulation on the synaptic repair protocols. If we use the Alliance medbay on the main ship, we could potentially fix your tinnitus. We could stabilize your neural pathways and remove the interference. You could be normal again. I froze. Normal. A world without the constant buzzing pressure. A world where I could sit in a quiet room and just hear the silence. It was everything I had ever wanted. It was the dream I had chased across 3 solar systems. I looked at Valina. Through our bond, she felt my hesitation. She didn't say anything, but I could feel her support, her willingness to let me go if that was what I truly wanted. She would stay and fight for her world, even if it meant losing the man who had become her other half. I thought about the fracture. I thought about the way the planet had felt when it was screaming in pain, and the way it felt now, a low, rhythmic thrum that I was the only one capable of truly understanding. If I fixed my brain, I would lose that. I would become deaf to the world I had promised to save. I spent my whole life thinking this was a bug, I said softly, looking at the glowing purple shunt on the back of my hand. I hated myself for it. I thought I was a broken machine in a world of perfect parts. But on this planet, for the first time, the glitch is the feature. My flaws are the only things that allow me to see the truth. I looked Caleth in the eye. If I go back to being normal, I won't be able to hear Malachor's frequencies. I won't be able to find the weak points in his resonance field. I won't be the architect he's afraid of. But Jax, the cost— I know the cost, Kay, I interrupted. The cost is me. But maybe the me I was trying to be wasn't the me I was meant to be. I'm keeping the noise. Valina squeezed my hand, a wave of pride and affection washing through the bond that was so strong it made my breath hitch. You are a warrior, Jaxen Vane, in your own discordant, stubborn way. Yeah, well, someone's got to be the grit in the gears, I said, winking at her. Now let's go find a ship. We have a spire to topple and a mad priest to knock off his high horse. As we walked out of the medical bay, I felt a strange sense of peace. The ringing was still there, louder than ever, a chaotic symphony of 1,000 different notes. But for the first time, I wasn't trying to drown it out. I was listening, and I could hear exactly where we needed to go. The southern wastes of Ethelgard made the Arctic on Earth look like a tropical resort. The ground was composed of jagged, blue-white crystal that hummed with a cold, biting frequency. The wind didn't just blow, it sang. A high-pitched, desolate area that tore at our resonance armor and froze the moisture in our breath. We were skimming across the crystalline dunes in a Royal Interceptor, a sleek, needle-shaped vessel that moved silently on a bed of magnetic levitation. Valina was at the helm, her hands moving with practiced grace across the console, while I sat in the sensor seat, my eyes closed, my mind extended into the freezing air. 3 kilometers out, I said, my voice echoing in the small cockpit. The interference is getting thicker. It feels like trying to swim through wet concrete. The resonator of Valus loomed ahead of us, a black, obsidian spike that seemed to swallow the light of the twin moons. It was surrounded by a swirling vortex of white fog, not frozen water, but pulverized crystal suspended in a high-frequency vibration field. "I can't maintain the flight path," Vilena said, her jaw clenched as the ship began to shudder. "The resonance is pushing back against our gravity drives. We have to ground the ship and proceed on foot." "On foot?" I opened my eyes, looking at the swirling vortex. "V, it's minus 40 degrees out there, and the air is vibrating at a pitch that can shatter a human femur. We won't make it 100 meters. "We will if we move in the shadow zones," she replied, bringing the ship down into a deep crevasse between two massive crystal dunes. "The natural formations provide a temporary harmonic shield. We will use the ley lines to guide us." We stepped out of the ship and the world immediately tried to kill us. The cold hit my skin like a million tiny needles, and the sound was a physical weight. It felt like I was being pressed into the ground by a giant, invisible hand. "Hold the bond," Valena projected, her hand finding mine in the darkness. The moment our fingers touched, the pressure eased. Our combined frequency created a small, shimmering bubble of stability around us. We were a single point of harmony in a world of absolute chaos. We moved through the crevasse, the crystal walls glowing with a faint, ghostly light. Above us, the vortex roared, a constant, shrieking reminder of Malakor's power. "I can hear him," I whispered, the ringing in my ears shifting to match the Black Spire's beat. "He's at the 98th percentile of the resonance peak. He's starting the final sequence. If he hits 100, the wall goes up." "Then we must be faster," Valena said, her pace quickening. As we approached the base of the spire, we encountered the first of Malakor's defenses. They weren't soldiers. They were resonators, automated crystalline turrets that fired pulses of pure, destructive sound. "Get down!" I yelled, pulling Valena behind a jagged outcropping as a beam of sonic energy turned the air into a shimmering heat haze. "I can't see the targeting arrays," Valena said, drawing her ceremonial blaster. "The fog is too thick." "I don't need to see them," I said, closing my eyes again. I focused on the turrets, listening to the hum of their capacitors. I could hear the buildup, the tiny, high-pitched whistle right before they fired. "Now!" I shouted. Valena leaned out and fired 3 precise shots, each one hitting a turret at the exact moment its internal shields dropped to vent heat. The turrets exploded in a shower of blue sparks. "Nice shooting, Tex," I muttered, my head spinning from the effort of tracking the frequencies. "Tex?" she asked, her confusion rippling through the bond. "Never mind. Just a human thing. Keep moving." We reached the base of the Black Spire. There was no door, no entrance. The obsidian was smooth, seamless, and cold enough to burn. "It's a solid-state structure," I said, placing my hand against the surface. The vibration was so intense it made my arm numb. "It doesn't have an interior. It's one giant antenna." "Then how do we stop it?" Valena asked. "We don't go inside. We go into the pulse," I said, looking up at the summit where the black crystal met the white fog. "The interface isn't physical. It's harmonic. We need to override the primary frequency from the base. We need to give it a note it can't handle." I knelt in the snow, or the crystal dust that passed for snow, and began to strip the casing off my resonance wrench. I didn't need the tool anymore. I needed the core. "Jaxen, what are you doing?" "The wrench has a variable frequency emitter," I explained, my fingers moving quickly despite the cold. "But it's too weak to hit the spire on its own. I'm going to use my neural shunt as a signal booster. I'm going to feed my own brain static directly into the spire's root." Valena grabbed my hands, her eyes wide with horror. "No, the feedback will destroy you. You saw what happened in the root chamber, and that was a fraction of this power." "The root chamber was a repair job," I said, looking her in the eye. "This is a demolition. Malakor's power comes from the fact that his song is perfect. It's a pure, unyielding line. It can handle strength, it can handle resistance, but it can't handle discordance. It can't handle me." "You are not a sacrifice, Jaxen," she cried, her voice echoing in my mind. "I did not bind myself to you just to watch you shatter." "I'm not sacrificing myself, V," I said. And for the first time, I realized I was telling the truth. I wasn't doing this because I wanted to die. I was doing this because I wanted to live. I wanted to live in a world that was loud and messy and full of noise. I'm just changing the station. I looked at the black spire, the dark reflection of everything the Athelians thought was perfect. They had spent thousands of years trying to be pure, trying to be silent, trying to be a perfect symphony. And in doing so, they had become fragile. They had become a world that could be broken by a single madman with a tuning fork. The lesson, V, I said, the thought crystallizing in my mind. The first ones didn't separate us because we were different. They separated us because they were afraid. They were afraid that the noise of humanity would ruin the music of Ethelgard. But they were wrong. Music isn't just the notes you play. It's the space between them. It's the mistakes. It's the cracks where the light gets in. I took a deep breath, the cold air burning my lungs. I spent my whole life trying to hide my cracks, I said. But the cracks are where the power is. I'm not broken Jaxen Vane anymore. I'm the discord. I grabbed the wires from the wrench and pressed them against my neural shunt. The world didn't explode. It went silent. I felt my consciousness leave my body, pulled into the black obsidian of the spire. I was no longer a man. I was a frequency. I was a jagged, ugly, beautiful line of static moving through a sea of perfect white. I saw Malachor. He was at the summit. His mind merged with the resonator. His ego expanded to the size of a continent. He felt me coming, a tiny, annoying itch in his perfect silence. "Cease, human," he projected, his voice a tidal wave of arrogance. "You are nothing but noise. You are the silence that remains when the song is over." "Sorry, Prillet," I thought, the words a roar of distorted guitar and crashing cymbals. But I never learned how to shut up. I didn't fight his energy. I didn't try to block it. I did exactly what I had done in the root chamber, but on a massive scale. I opened myself up. I let every memory of pain, every moment of failure, every shard of my broken, tinnitus-filled life pour into the spire. I gave him the sound of a crowded street in New York, the sound of a faulty fusion reactor, the sound of my mother's voice when she was worried about me, the sound of the wind through a rusted fence. I gave him the noise of life. The black spire began to hum, then it began to shake, then it began to scream. The perfect frequency Malachor had built couldn't handle the discordance. It was like a glass bridge being hit by a sledgehammer. The pure lines began to shatter, replaced by the chaotic, rhythmic pulsing of my own mind. Through the bond, I felt Vilena. She was there with me, her melody weaving through my static, giving it shape, giving it purpose. She wasn't trying to fix me. She was singing with me. We were the song of the flawed. We were the anthem of the broken. The resonator of Valus couldn't contain it. The black crystal began to turn translucent, then white, then a brilliant iridescent purple. The energy peak hit 100, but it wasn't a wall. It was a bridge. A massive wave of purple energy erupted from the summit, washing over the southern wastes, clearing the fog, silencing the vortex. I felt myself falling, pulled back into the cold, the snow, the physical world. I hit the ground hard, my breath leaving me in a single painful gasp. I could hear the wind. I could hear the ship's distant hum. I could hear the sound of Vilena's heartbeat. But the ringing was different. It wasn't a whistle anymore. It wasn't a roar. It was a harmony. A low, beautiful background hum that felt like the planet itself was finally breathing in sync with me. I opened my eyes. The black spire was gone. In its place was a tower of shimmering, multicolored crystal that pulsed with a warm, steady light. The southern wastes weren't dark anymore. They were glowing with the colors of 1,000 suns. Vilena was kneeling over me, her face wet with tears, her violet eyes wide with wonder. "You did it," she whispered, her voice a melody that brought the world into focus. "The resonator, it didn't shatter, it transformed. You rewrote the fundamental frequency of the spire." I just added a little texture," I croaked, managing a weak smile. I looked around. Malachor was nowhere to be seen. He had been consumed by the transformation, his ego shattered by the very discord he had tried to erase. But I didn't care about Malachor. I looked at Vilena, and for the first time I didn't see a princess or a commander or a genetic bridge. I saw a woman, a beautiful, imperfect, wonderful woman who loved a broken man from a distant world. V, I said, my voice gaining strength. I can still hear it. The pulse. It's different. It is the song of the convergence, she said, her hand finding mine. It is the sound of two worlds finally speaking the same language. Not the language of perfection, the language of us. I sat up leaning against a piece of the transformed crystal. My head felt light, my memories were still a bit fuzzy around the edges, and I was pretty sure I would never be able to eat a strawberry again without hearing a G-sharp. But as I looked out over the glowing southern wastes, I realized that I wouldn't have it any other way. The noise wasn't my enemy. It was my guide. And for a guy who had spent his whole life trying to find the silence, I had finally realized that the silence was the only thing I didn't need. "Hey, V," I asked as she helped me to my feet. "Yes, husband?" "I think I'm ready for that anniversary gift now, but let's skip the blaster. I think I've had enough things blowing up for 1 year." She laughed, a sound that resonated through our bond with a warmth that made the cold wastes feel like a summer day. "I think I have a better idea," she said. "There is a place in the northern hemisphere, a quiet valley where the crystal doesn't sing, it just listens." "Sounds perfect," I said. Or, you know, close enough. As we walked back toward the ship, hand in hand, the purple light of the spire followed us, a constant, steady reminder that even in a world of perfect sound, there is always room for a little bit of noise, and sometimes the noise is the most beautiful thing of all. The immediate aftermath of the Southern Convergence was not a victory parade or a grand symphony. It was a long, heavy silence that felt like the entire planet of Ethelgard was taking its first deep breath after 1,000 years of suffocation. The black spire of Valus, once a needle of pure obsidian malice, now stood as a pulsating monument of translucent violet and gold crystal. It didn't shriek anymore. It hummed a low, comforting frequency that felt like the purr of a massive, contented cat. I was lying on my back in the crystalline dust, staring up at the twin moons as they slowly began to fade behind the morning light. My body felt like it had been put through an industrial blender and then reassembled by someone who didn't quite have the manual. My neural shunt was still warm against my skin, and the static in my head had settled into a rhythmic thrumming that matched the pulse of the spire. "Jaxen," Valena's voice came to me, not through the air, but through the deep, aching bond that now tied our very atoms together. Her mental presence was weary, stained with the gray smoke of exhaustion, but her relief was a bright, golden thread that kept me anchored to the world. "I'm here, V," I projected, though the effort made my temples throb. "I'm just checking the structural integrity of the ground. It's very solid." She appeared over me, her violet eyes red-rimmed and tired, her commander's armor cracked and frosted with ice. She didn't say anything at first. She just knelt beside me and rested her hand on my chest. I could feel her energy flowing into me, a gentle tide of warmth that began to knit the frayed edges of my consciousness back together. "We are changed," she said softly, her voice catching in the cold air. "Not just you and I. The pulse itself has been rewritten. Malakor's silence has been broken, but the old song of Ethelgard is gone too." I managed to sit up, leaning against a jagged chunk of what used to be a sonic cannon. I looked out over the wastes. The white fog was gone, replaced by a soft, luminescent haze that made the horizon look like a painting. In the distance, I could see the lights of a rescue ship, Calith and the Earth Alliance team, coming to fetch the pieces of their favorite galactic disaster. "The old song wasn't working, V," I said, my voice a dry rasp. "It was a loop, a perfect, beautiful, dying loop. We just gave it a new bridge, a little bit of human discord to keep it interesting." She looked at the transformed spire, her expression a mix of awe and lingering sorrow. "My people will not understand this. Not at first. They will see the colors and the warmth, but they will also see the loss of their purity. They will see the ghost of Malakor in every unexpected note. Then we'll teach them how to listen," I said. "We'll show them that a flaw isn't a failure. It's just an opportunity for a different kind of harmony." The rescue ship landed 50 meters away, its gravity drives kicking up a cloud of sapphire dust. Calith was the first one out, her medical scanner already chirping like a frantic bird. She practically tackled me, her face a mask of fury and terror. "You absolute, total, unmitigated gearhead," she yelled, though her hands were trembling as she checked my vitals. "Do you have any idea how close you came to zeroing out? I lost your biosign for 3 minutes, Jax. 3 minutes of absolute flatline. I was already drafting the KIA report for your mother." 3 minutes. I managed a weak grin. That's a new record. Most people only get 15 seconds of fame. I got 3 minutes of eternity. "It's not funny, Jax," Kayla snapped, her eyes brimming with tears. "Look at your neural readings. You've got massive synaptic rewrite in the auditory cortex. The tinnitus, it's not just a glitch anymore. It's become a structural part of your neural architecture. You've basically turned your brain into a biological receiver for the planet's ley lines." Velina stood up, her hand still resting on my shoulder. "He is the architect of the convergence, Dr. Thorne. He has done what no Athelian could. He has embraced the noise." Kaleth looked at Velina, then back at me. She sighed, her anger deflating into a weary acceptance. "I suppose that's one way to put it. Scientifically speaking, he's a walking miracle of bad decisions. But he's alive. For now." The trip back to the palace was a blur of blue lights and low-frequency humming. I spent most of it drifting in and out of a dreamlike state where I could hear the conversations of the palace walls and the rhythmic breathing of the crystal foundations. It wasn't overwhelming anymore. It was just there, like the sound of the ocean if you lived in a house on the beach. When we reached the Grand Hall, the atmosphere was drastically different from the tense, hostile gala of 48 hours prior. The Athelian nobles were gathered in the shadows, their movements hesitant, their usual melodic chatter replaced by a hushed, uncertain whispering. They looked at us, at the human with the glowing purple shunt and the High Cantor with the bruised face and the steady gaze, and they didn't see an insult. They saw a mystery. General Kor, Velina's father, met us at the entrance. He looked older, his blue skin faded to a pale indigo, but his eyes were sharp. He looked at the purple energy pulsing through his daughter's armor, and then he looked at me. "The resonator of Valus has been transformed," he said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble. "The reports say the southern wastes are no longer silent. They are singing a song we do not recognize." "It's a new era, Father," Velina said, stepping forward. "The pure song was a cage. We have been set free by the very thing we feared most, the discordance of our kin from the stars." The general was silent for a long moment. He reached out and touched the crystalline pillar beside him. It hummed back, a warm, textured vibration that felt nothing like the sterile perfection of the old days. "It has texture," he whispered. "It feels alive." "It is alive," I said, leaning on Kaleth for support. "It's messy and it's complicated, and it's going to require a lot of maintenance. But it's not going to die. Not today." The next few weeks were a chaotic scramble of reconstruction and diplomacy. Malakor's loyalists had vanished into the shadows, their command frequencies shattered by the transformation of the spire. Averon was in a deep resonance stasis, waiting for a trial that would likely redefine Athelian law. But the real work was happening in the minds of the people. I spent my days working with the Athelian engineers, showing them how to bridge their bioenergy systems with Earth Alliance tech. It wasn't easy. They looked at my blueprints and saw noise, and I looked at their crystal conduits and saw inefficiency. But slowly we found a middle ground. We created the first hybrid power grid, a system that used the planet's natural resonance but allowed for the flexibility of human fusion. Through it all, Velina was my anchor. The bond between us had stabilized into a constant, comforting presence. I knew when she was stressed about a council meeting before she even walked through the door, and she knew when my headache was flaring up before I even reached for a painkiller. We weren't just married, we were a synchronized system. One evening we stood on the balcony of our quarters looking out over the capital city. The bioluminescence was brighter than it had ever been, casting the crystal towers in a kaleidoscope of shifting colors. "Do you regret it?" I asked, looking at the glowing purple shunt on her wrist. "The loss of the silence?" Velina leaned against the railing, the wind catching her translucent silks. "I used to think that perfection was the only way to be worthy, Jaxen. I spent every hour of every day trying to hide my doubts, my fears, my flaws. I thought that if I wasn't the perfect Cantor, Ethelgard would fall. But now I realize that it was the perfection that was killing us. It left no room for growth. No room for us. She turned to me, her eyes reflecting the vibrant lights of the city. I do not miss the silence. The world is much more interesting with the noise. I took her hand, our fingers intertwining, our frequencies merging into a single steady pulse. I still had the ringing in my ears. I still had gaps in my memory. I still felt like a glitch in a world of beautiful music. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to fix the glitch. I was just living in it. Yeah, I said, pulling her close. The noise is definitely an upgrade. As the twin moons rose over the horizon, I felt a sudden, sharp kick of energy from the planet below. It wasn't a fracture or a tremor. It was a greeting. Ethelgard was awake, and it was ready for the next movement in the symphony. And for a guy who had spent his whole life trying to turn down the volume, I realized I was finally ready to play my part. The silence was gone, and in its place was something much better, a song that was just getting started. 1 year later, the anniversary of the convergence arrived not with the strike of a ceremonial bell, but with the sound of a very small, very loud hybrid baby complaining about her breakfast. "She's definitely yours, Jaxen," Kayla said, laughing as she watched Kira Mascore, as we had named her, try to eat her bowl of nutrient mash with a level of intensity usually reserved for orbital mechanics. "She has your stubbornness and your mother's eyes, and apparently she also has your taste for things that are loud." I was sitting at the kitchen table in our new home, a modest, honey-colored geode nestled in the Valley of Listeners. We had moved away from the capital city 6 months after the wedding, seeking a place where the noise of the planet was a bit more manageable. Kira was sitting in a levitating high chair, her blue skin shimmering with a soft, iridescent glow that matched the purple tint of my own neural shunt. "She's not loud, Kay," I said, dodging a spoonful of mash that Kira had launched in my direction with surprising accuracy. "She's just rhythmically expressive. It's a feature, not a bug." "Call it whatever you want," Kayla said, settling into a chair with a cup of Athelian mint tea. "But the Alliance Council is already calling her the most important biological event in the last 10,000 years. No pressure on the parenting, by the way." Valina walked into the room, her hair pulled back in a simple braid, her formal commander's armor replaced by a soft woven robe that hummed a gentle lullaby. She stopped by Kira's chair and pressed her fingers to the baby's forehead. A tiny ripple of purple energy passed between them, and Kira immediately settled, a wide, gummy grin spreading across her face. "She is sensing the morning resonance," Valina said, her voice a warm melody that always felt like coming home. "The valley is especially active today. The crystal flowers are blooming in the north." "Tell the flowers to keep it down to a dull roar," I muttered, though I was smiling. The past year had been a whirlwind of change that would have made even the most seasoned diplomat dizzy. The Earth Alliance and Ethelgard had signed the first-ever interspecies resonance treaty, a document that outlined everything from energy-sharing protocols to joint educational programs. There were now 5 human engineers working at the root chamber, and 3 Athelian Cantors studying acoustics at the University of Neo-London. The world wasn't perfect. There were still purists who grumbled in the dark corners of the southern cities, and there were still people on Earth who feared that the Athelian influence would turn us into emotionally driven radio towers. But the results were undeniable. The energy crisis on Ethelgard was a thing of the past, and Earth was seeing a surge in sustainable technology that was reversing centuries of environmental damage. But for me, the biggest change wasn't the technology or the politics. It was the way I felt when I woke up in the morning. I stood up from the table and walked over to the large bay window that looked out over the valley. The crystal formations were glowing in the early light, shifting from a soft rose pink to a vibrant, energetic gold. I could hear them, not as a piercing, annoying ringing, but as a textured, living choir. Each crystal had its own note, its own story, its own flaw, and together they created something that was infinitely more beautiful than silence. I reached up and touched the neural shunt behind my ear. It was a part of me now, as much as my hands or my heart. I had stopped trying to fix my brain months ago. I realized that the things I thought were broken, the tinnitus, the hypersensitivity, the way I felt the world instead of just seeing it, were the very things that made me capable of this life. Valina came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist, leaning her head against my back. Her resonance was a steady, loving thrum that cleared the last of the morning static from my mind. "What are you thinking, architect?" she projected. "I'm thinking about that first day," I said, turning in her arms. "The day I stumbled into the grotto and saw a princess without her armor. I was so terrified. I thought my life was over. I thought I had made the ultimate mistake." Vilena looked up at me, her violet eyes soft. "It was a mistake, Jaxen. A glorious, chaotic, necessary mistake. If you had been the perfect engineer, you would have stayed in the corridor, you would have fixed the pylon and gone home, and Ethelgard would have died in its perfection." "I guess I owe my life to my own incompetence," I said, laughing. "Not incompetence," she corrected, her voice firm. "Humanity. You brought the noise, Jaxen, and the noise saved us." We stood there for a long time, watching the suns rise over the valley, listening to the world sing its messy, complicated, beautiful song. Kira started babbling in the background, a sound that was half human laughter and half Aethelian chime. It was the sound of a new species, the sound of a future that wasn't afraid of its own cracks. I looked back at the journey that had brought me here. I saw the scared, insecure man who had left Earth because he couldn't stand the sound of his own head. I saw the desperate architect who had fought for a world that wasn't his, and I saw the husband and father who had finally found the one thing he had never had: peace in the middle of the storm. I hadn't found the silence. I had found something much louder. I had found the courage to be exactly who I was, a flawed, flickering light in a vast, dark universe. And in that acceptance, I had found a strength that perfection could never provide. The ringing in my ears was still there. It would always be there. But as I held my wife and listened to my daughter's laughter, I realized that I wouldn't trade it for all the silence in the galaxy. The noise wasn't the problem, it was the symphony, and I was finally in tune. As the morning light filled the room, Kira managed to grab a floating crystal chime that was hanging from the ceiling. She shook it, and the sound resonated through the geode, a bright, clear note that was perfectly, wonderfully out of sync with everything else. "Atta girl," I whispered. "Keep them on their toes." Valena smiled, and through our bond, I felt a wave of absolute, unadulterated happiness. The world was loud, the future was uncertain, and we were both beautifully, perfectly broken. It was the best note I'd ever heard. I spent 20 years of my life fighting a war against my own brain. I thought that if I could just find the right frequency, if I could just silence the ringing, I would finally be the man I was supposed to be. I looked at the world through the lens of my deficiencies, seeing every glitch as a sign of failure. I was a man waiting for a repair that would never come, holding my breath for a silence that didn't exist. But standing here now, on a world that sings through its scars, I realized that I was looking at it all wrong. We spend so much of our lives trying to polish away the rough edges, trying to hide the cracks in our stories, thinking that perfection is the only way to be worthy of love or success. We're so afraid of the noise that we miss the music. Ethelgard almost died because it was too perfect to survive. It was my flaws, my broken neural pathways, that became the bridge to its salvation. It wasn't my expertise that saved the pulse. It was my discordance. It was the messy human part of me that understood how to fix a failing heart. I'm still Jaxen Vane. I'm still a guy who forgets where he put his keys and worries about the future. I still have a ringing in my head that never stops. But I'm no longer afraid of the noise. I've learned that the most beautiful things in the universe aren't the ones that are flawless. They're the ones that have been broken and put back together in a way that creates something entirely new. We are not defined by our perfection. We are defined by how we dance in the static. I used to think the ringing was a curse. Now I know it's just the universe's way of making sure I never stop listening. And I wonder, as I look out at all those distant stars, what are the sounds you've been trying so hard to ignore in yourself? What if the very thing you think is your greatest weakness is actually the only thing that can save your world? The valley's quiet now, or as quiet as Ethelgard ever gets. I'm going to go sit on the porch and just listen to the mess. It's a pretty good song once you get the hang of it. What is that one flaw you have spent your whole life trying to fix or hide? And what would happen if you stopped fighting it and started listening to what it's trying to tell you? I reached down and picked up one of Kira's discarded toys, a small humming crystal that was slightly out of tune, and placed it carefully on the shelf next to my old resonance wrench. A perfect pair of beautiful mistakes.